Does the European Union have a future, or is it in the midst of disintegration? I'll ask top economist and outspoken former finance minister of embattled Greece, Yanis Varoufakis. I'm Mehdi Hasan, also on the show. Is modern warfare moving online? And if so, how seriously should we take the threat from cyber attack? That's our debate in the arena. But first, are we witnessing the beginning of the end for the European Union? It's been shaken by fiscal, debt and migrant crises, the rise of the far right and, of course, Brexit. The former Greek finance minister and top economist Yanis Varoufakis, who clashed repeatedly with his eurozone counterparts over their vision for the future, thinks the European Union needs urgent reform and that his country was unfairly punished by the EU's elites. This week's headliner from Athens, Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis Varoufakis, thanks for joining me on Upfront. The biggest financial crisis of our lifetimes took place in 2008. The big banks discredited, the neoliberal order in chaos. You'd think this would be the moment for the left to be dominant, and yet almost a decade later, it's the right that's dominant, from the UK to the US to across parts of Europe. Why has the left failed so miserably in its response to the crash?
For two reasons. The first one is the left lost its moral compass a long time ago and never managed to recover from the crimes of the Soviet Union and from the collapse of the socialist states in 1991. The second reason, of course, is remember 1929? 1929 was that period's 2008. And what happened immediately after that? A hapless liberal establishment failed to manage global capitalism. And instead of the left rising up, the deflationary forces that were unleashed bred political monsters from the right, very similar to what we have now.
You're now calling for a European New Deal to be launched, involving large-scale green investment, employment guarantees, an anti-poverty fund. But where's the strategy to make it happen? You're not the first to call for stuff like this, are you? The left is great at diagnoses, at seminars, even at protests, but it isn't great at getting results, at getting stuff done, at implementing its ideas, is it?
Well, there is a profound difference between our European New Deal proposals as DiEM25 and what the left has been doing. By the way, I am a left-winger, but the movement that I belong to, that I've helped set up, the Democracy in Europe movement, is not a left-wing movement. It's a broad alliance of progressives, of commonsensical people who want to share a platform for restoring a modicum of rationality and humanism in Europe. It's not pie-in-the-sky material. We're not saying that first we need to have a revolution, change the constitution, have a completely different kind of world, another world is possible, and then everything is going to be okay. No, we're not saying that. We are putting forward very specific proposals on what to do with bank regulation, what to do about the management of public debt that has run away from us, how to deal with poverty that could be applied tomorrow morning without any huge ideological sea change, simply by means of existing institutions doing the right thing.
You, as a left-wing economist with, some would say, radical inclinations, got the chance not just to theorize solutions or propose solutions, you got a chance to exercise actual power. You were finance minister of Greece for 5 months in 2015 at the height of the debt crisis, and yet your tenure was a disaster, wasn't it?
Well, allow me to say that you should not confuse power with office. I had the office. I had the Ministry of Finance. I had no power. My country has been bankrupt, well, truly and deeply bankrupt since 2010. And all that I tried to do was to use the office that the Greek people elected me to in order to go to the creditors of our bankrupt state and put forward to them a mutually beneficial agreement, an agreement that would allow us to grow out of our crisis, out of our depression, so as to be able to look after our people and also to repay more money to the creditors. That tenure, as you said, well, more or less, as you said, ended up in failure. But why? because the creditors did not really want their money back. They were only interested in crashing our government, making sure that there would be no such mutually advantageous agreement. Why? Only because they wanted to use this crashing of our government, of the Greek Spring, of the Athens Spring, as a morality tale by which to frighten, to scare Spaniards, Irish, Italian, and ultimately French voters from getting ideas that they can elect a government that will contest the powers of the Troika.
Many would agree with that analysis of yours, and the so-called Troika, the IMF, the EU Commission, the European Central Bank, do have a lot to answer for when it comes to the Greek debt crisis. There's no doubt they were pretty destructive. You called it fiscal waterboarding. But did you also undermine yourself by antagonizing your fellow finance ministers so much, saying you welcome their hatred on Twitter, comparing the eurozone to a sinking Titanic?
Not in the slightest, because we have to get the timing right. You quoted a tweet that I'm very proud of after our government was crushed. When I first went to the Eurogroup, to Brussels, to Berlin, to Frankfurt, I went there saying to them that I'm here in order to strike a mutually advantageous agreement with you. I'm not here to pontificate, I'm not here to tell you what is right, but I'm here to tell you that what we've been doing so far in Greece has been a dismal failure. We do not have the monopoly of the truth as to what should happen in Greece, but nor do you. Let's sit down and find common ground. This is how I went to them. The program I put to them, to my colleagues in the Eurogroup, was moderate, down the road. There was nothing left-wing about it. It was common sense, and they chose to ignore it.
Those are fair points, and I've already conceded them in a sense in saying that the Troika has a lot to answer for on the ideological front. What I asked you was about your own personal strategy. You make a fair point about the tweet, but of course the Titanic comparison came hours before you became finance minister. Surely you wouldn't dispute the New York Times description of you as his personal style was blunt. He disregarded the bloodless etiquette of European politicians who saw you as a, quote, hothead.
It's not true. I really dispute it. Firstly, there was no Titanic comment before I was elected. There was a Titanic comment which was completely and utterly correct and vindicated by history, which I made in 2010.
No, you said on Channel 4 News on in January 2015, 26th of January, I think days before you became finance minister, the day before, you said the people are in third class, as in the Titanic, starting to feel the drowning effects first. You did make a comparison of the eurozone with the Titanic.
I must have made more than one such comparison, but let me defend this point. What I was saying was that the eurozone was a vessel in deep trouble. We were heading in the wrong direction, and was I not confirmed by the facts? Yes, we were. And the point I made about the third class, the second class, and the first class passengers was that it is idiotic when the vessel is heading for the rocks, or for the iceberg, or for whatever, for the passengers of the third class, I was implying Greece, to be having it out with the passengers of the first class, because in the end we were all going to sink together. That was not antagonizing the German government, it was exactly the opposite. It was to say to them, we are in this together.
Some on the left, both inside and outside of Greece, have argued that you could have negotiated more effectively if you'd drawn up a detailed plan for exiting the single currency, a task you failed to undertake.
Well, you know what the most amusing part of it is, that I am constantly being criticized both for failing to draw up a plan for getting Greece out of the eurozone and for drawing up a plan to get Greece out of the eurozone.
And which is a fairer description in your view?
Both of them are unfair. Let me put it very succinctly for you. I had a plan. I had a plan for managing Grexit, an imposed eviction of Greece from the eurozone. I had this plan even before I was minister. I was working on it. And indeed, I can assure you that there is a high treason charge in the Greek parliament tabled by some deluded people because I had this plan, and I admit to it. I'm guilty as charged. I had this plan. At the same time, it was never my policy to get Greece out of the euro. You see, I'm a very staunch critic of the euro, but I do believe that there is a fundamental difference between saying we should not have gotten into the euro, I still believe that, and saying that we should get out of the euro. My view was very simple. Let me just spell it out for you. We should negotiate very hard for a viable agreement within the eurozone. That was my objective, and therefore I never threatened anyone with Grexit. But if functionaries in Brussels, Frankfurt and Berlin threatened me with Grexit if I did not sign up on a dotted line of an extend and pretend non-viable loan agreement, then I would say to them, push us out, and I'm ready for it. I think this is a pretty straightforward position, isn't it?
And the Greek crisis is far from over today, of course. Prime Minister Tsipras now faces a choice between agreeing to additionally imposed external austerity or calling for fresh elections. I want to read to you a quote from one Greek economist who said recently, "We could be looking at potentially disastrous political turmoil, which could bring back the scenario of Grexit with a vengeance." Grexit, Greek exit from the European Union. Does that worry you? Is that on the cards?
It never went away. It's not going to come back. It never went away. Let me put it this way. Ever since we accepted the first bailout loan in 2010, Greece became unsustainable, fully and totally unsustainable. All we've been doing since 2010 is we have been, getting a new credit card to pay off the previous credit card. Everybody knows that this can't end well. Everyone knows that. A 10-year-old could tell you that. My tenure had the purpose of ending this. Tsipras, my prime minister, capitulated, and we continue along those lines. Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, who is the only person in the Eurogroup that actually has a plan. I disagree with his plan, but he's the only one with a plan. Has a very simple plan, and that is for Greece to get out of the eurozone. He disagrees with his chancellor, Chancellor Merkel. This disagreement is the main reason why we're in limbo. We are neither in the eurozone nor out of the eurozone. So as long as we are in that unsustainable limbo, the uncertainty will be very, very high.
Will Greece be a member of the eurozone and or the European Union in a year or 2 years' time, in your view?
I think that this is the wrong question, allow me to say. The right question is there going to be a eurozone and a European Union
and your answer?
in 1 or 2 years' time? Remember,
and your answer
Greece
to that
is
question?
not that important. Well, the way we're going, I cannot see Italy remaining in the eurozone for very long. You see, when you allow an epidemic to start spreading from a place like Greece to Spain, to Italy, to Ireland, then eventually it gets to a place like Italy. Do you realize that now, as we speak, only one political party in Italy wants to keep Italy in the eurozone? Greece, I insist on this, Greece should not be important. The only reason why we keep talking about Greece is because it is symptomatic of the architectural design faults and crisis of the eurozone. This is what we should be focusing on.
Yanis Varoufakis, thanks for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you very much.
Brexit means Brexit. That's the inane line that British government ministers have been pushing since June 2016's historic referendum in which a narrow 52% of Brits voted to leave the European Union. But we now know, thanks to a speech from Prime Minister Theresa May, what Brexit will look like. And it will involve the UK leaving not just the European Union, but the European single market too.
I want to be clear. What I am proposing cannot mean membership of the single market.
What's the big problem? Well, that's not what people voted for. They voted to leave the EU, not the single market. But hold on, say the pro-Brexit crowd. Withdrawing from the single market was kind of the point of the vote. To leave the EU means you have to leave the single market with its free movement of goods and labour. Not true, actually. Norway is outside the EU, but is still part of the single market. It accepts free movement of labour in return for the clear economic benefits of being part of the biggest single market in the world. And for years, anti-EU campaigners extol Norway as a model for a post-Brexit Britain outside of the EU. Millionaire businessman and Brexit donor Aaron Banks tweeted, increasingly, the Norway option looks like the best for the UK. So you can imagine how some people who voted for Brexit thought the UK might still be able to stay in the single market. Now, some in the pro-Brexit campaign, like then Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, did say that if leaving the EU meant leaving the single market, so be it. But plenty of others weren't so clear. In fact, you could say they suggested the exact opposite. Here's Conservative MEP and well-known Brexit champion, Daniel Hannan.
Absolutely nobody is talking about threatening our place in the single market.
Nobody, apparently. Here's former Conservative Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson.
Only a madman would actually leave the market. It's not the EU, which is a political organisation, delivering the prosperity and buying our goods. It's the market, it's the members of the market, and we will carry on trading with the market.
Only a madman would leave the market. Now, pro-Brexit campaigners say, hold on, those quotes are out of context. All they're actually saying is that Britain should continue to have access to the single market, which is a complete cop-out, of course, because that's a meaningless statement. I mean, loads of countries, from the United States to the Kingdom of Jordan, have access to the single market, can export into it. The issue is on what terms, because not being inside the single market means the UK loses out on clear economic benefits. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Theresa May herself speaking in private to Goldman Sachs just last May, back when she opposed Brexit.
I think the economic arguments are clear. I think being part of a 500 million population trading bloc is significant for us. So I think there are definite benefits for us in economic terms.
How times change. With cyber attacks grabbing global news headlines and governments across the world pumping billions of dollars into cyber weapons and cyber security, is modern warfare moving online? According to NATO, for example, cyber attacks are becoming more common, sophisticated and damaging. So how worried should we all be by the rise of new digital armies? Joining me to discuss this are Hector Monsiga, the hacker formerly known as Sabu, who once led the notorious hacking group LolSec. Today he's the director of the cybersecurity firm Rhino Security Labs. And from Helsinki, Mikko Huppanen, a self-described hacker hunter and chief research officer of F-Secure, a leading cybersecurity firm. Thanks both for joining me in the arena. Let me begin by asking you both. This is a really complex issue. US President Donald Trump spoke recently about the cyber, and he said it was a huge problem. How do you even define what we're talking about? What is cyber warfare, Hector, in your view?
Well, in my personal opinion, cyber warfare is something that has not been defined yet. I mean, you can go to Wikipedia and get a general idea of what it is, but we don't really know. There's no way to put it. There's no simple, easy answer here. There are no borders on the internet, as far as we can see. So how do we define warfare on the internet? There are skirmishes, there are little conflicts, and there are many examples that hopefully we could discuss today. But in terms of when it comes down to government to government rather, you have incidents, you have indicators, you have potential compromises, leaks and dumps and all that good stuff. But the main problem that we have is attribution. We don't really know where these attacks are coming from. We could guesstimate. A lot of security companies do that. But at the end of the day, there's no clear answer. Mikko,
is that a view you share, that it's difficult, A, to define what is an act of war online and to identify the perpetrator of that act?
The way I look at cyber warfare is that cyber, or computers and online systems, are yet another new domain for warfare. Just like we had land war, sea war, air war, space war, and now cyberspace war. And I don't actually believe that we will see cyber war or a future war which would be a cyber war. I think it's going to be one of the elements that will be used in conflicts. And most of the things that we see today labeled as cyber war have nothing to do with war. Most of the stuff governments are doing online today is actually about espionage. It's not about waging war, it's about stealing information.
In all the other types of war that we talk about, whether it's land-based war, air war, etc., people die. Is there a sense that cyber war we're less worried about because it's not killing people directly?
Well, if you look at what's been happening over the last months in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, there actually are examples of people dying. There are multiple reports of Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian artillery soldiers, with their mobile phones getting infected by Russian malware, which has then been used to pinpoint their geolocation, after which there's been artillery fire from the Russian side to their locations. So basically what's happening here is that Ukrainian soldiers are dying because their phones got infected by a piece of malware. And that's as close to cyber war that I can think of. That really is something that we should be calling cyber war.
Let's be very clear here for the viewers. When we talk about cyber attacks, when we talk about people hacking governments or companies, this is not just the Chinese intelligence service or the Russian FSB or the CIA. This is private individuals,
It could be.
regular civilians,
Absolutely.
non-state actors.
Yeah.
You yourself, in a previous life, were a hacktivist. You led the infamous LulzSec hacking group. I believe you've personally hacked the Chinese government and the Tunisian government during the Arab Spring. What made you want to do that? What motivated you to do that?
Well, I was at a different point in my life. You know, I felt like I wanted to do something good, right, quote unquote. There, I felt like I was in the right direction. Unfortunately, that was not really the path. In hindsight, now that I've grown more and I've evolved a little bit more, I totally see the wrong there. But at one point in my life, look, I was this random kid from the projects that was involving myself in the middle of a Tunisian revolution.
You went from being a hacker to actually working with the FBI, with the authorities, to protect the US government from cyber attacks. How effective were you in that role?
Well, in the position I was in, essentially you would say I was kind of in the middle of all the noise, right? All the signal traffic. And everyone just kept sending me messages, or messages were basically flying through my screen. And during that small time period, we're talking about less than 8 months, we did stop over 300 cyber attacks against the US and other international assets, 3 of which were national security. So it was pretty effective. And even before I was arrested, the FBI were already doing exactly this. Yeah. They had moles all over the place.
Well, let me put that point to Mikko in Finland, who is all about cybersecurity. Mikko, when you look at the threats that are out there every day, what proportion of the threats online are coming from governments? How big is the threat from governments versus non-state actors, versus people like Hector in a previous life?
Well, we have completely different groups of attackers. I mean, the hacktivists, clearly one group. Then the criminals who want to make money is clearly another group. Then we have governments, and we probably also have extremists as an upcoming risk, which really isn't something we would have seen many examples of. And when we look at the amount of attacks, we see it's an overwhelming majority is coming from the criminals. On a typical day, our research labs receive around 400,000 malware samples, and we estimate that over 98% of those are coming from organized online crime groups, which are trying to make money. So it's actually very rare to be hit by a governmental attack. But when it happens, it's very, very serious, because criminals are fairly democratic with their attacks. They target everybody. They don't really care who you are if they can get your credit card. But when a government wants to gain access to your system, they're not interested into anyone else, and they're willing to use much stronger methods to gain access. So it's very serious, but it's also very rare.
A lot of people watching at home will be wondering 2 things in terms of their own lives. Number one, how vulnerable are things like power grids, utility companies, traffic and transportation systems that ordinary people depend on every day? How vulnerable are they to an act of cyber war? And 2, how vulnerable are they personally in terms of their emails? How easy is it to get into people's emails and crack their passwords?
Well, from my personal experience, I got to see, and I got to even connect to my previous life, industrial systems. I got to see how easy it is. It is to connect. In some cases, or in most cases, a lot of these systems are installed with default passwords straight from the manual, and usually it's just 4 zeros. That's just reality.
Wow.
But not just that, there's it's always a human element. There's always a weakness to every infrastructure, and it's always the human. Regardless of how secure an environment is, there's always a way to exfiltrate information, especially if there are people inside that are a little bit nefarious, or even when it comes down to your personal security. It's very easy for an attacker to get your information, whether it's by social engineering, whether it's by hacking into a third-party website and simply downloading a password that you use everywhere, and just log into your bank account and go from there.
Mikko, one final question to you. Are we in the beginning or in the middle of a Cold War-style cyber arms race?
We just got out of the last arms race, which was the nuclear arms race, which lasted 60 years. It seems that we are now jumping to the next arms race, and that will be the cyber arms race. And it might go on for the next decades, maybe for the next 60 years. And it's going to take a very long time until we get to talk about things like, rules of cyber war or laws of cyber war, or about things like cyber disarmament. So we are in the beginning now.
Hector, Miko, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.